The year is 1280. Air, thick with the scent of cold stone and damp lime, hangs heavy within the rising skeleton of Chartres Cathedral. Outside, the medieval world sleeps under a sliver of moon. But here, high on a wooden scaffold, a lone master mason works. His face, etched with the fatigue of a long day and now illuminated by the nervous dance of a single tallow lamp, is a mask of concentration. His name is lost to us, a ghost in the annals of history, but his work is about to become an immortal whisper. The rhythmic tap of his mallet against his chisel is a secret heartbeat in the silent nave. He is giving the final, intricate touches to a corbel, a stone support that will soon be lost amidst the soaring grandeur of the vaulting. But this is no ordinary carving. It is not a saint, an angel, or a grotesque demon meant to ward off evil. From the rough limestone, a face emerges, wreathed in acanthus and oak leaves. Vines sprout from its mouth, curling around its cheeks, a living, breathing fusion of humanity and forest. This is the Green Man carving, a visage whose roots run deeper than the cathedral's foundations, deep into the pagan soil of pre-Christian Europe. His work is clandestine, performed under the cloak of night, away from the watchful eyes of the cathedral dean or the overseeing bishop. This single act is a profound contradiction. He is a builder of God's house, a servant of the church that demanded absolute theological purity. The same church that had, only a generation before, ruthlessly crushed the Cathar heresy in the south of France for its dualistic beliefs. The smoke from the pyres of Montségur had barely cleared from the European consciousness. To be accused of heresy was to be sentenced to a horrific death. And yet, here he is, chiseling a symbol of the untamed, cyclical, and often chaotic world of nature. A deity of the wildwood, a spirit of rebirth known to the Celts as Cernunnos and to the Romans as Silvanus, into the very fabric of a monument dedicated to the singular, transcendent God of Abraham. This was an act of immense risk. Was it a defiant gesture of a hidden faith? A nostalgic nod to the beliefs of his ancestors? Or something more complex? To understand his audacity, we must understand his world. The master masons of the Gothic era were not mere laborers. They were part of powerful, secretive guilds, the keepers of practical and theoretical knowledge that was the medieval equivalent of rocket science. They were geometers, engineers, and artists who commanded immense respect and wielded significant power. Their knowledge, passed down from master to apprentice through sworn oaths and secret signs, was their currency. They traveled across Europe, from one great building project to another, a brotherhood bound by shared craft and guarded secrets. This unique status afforded them a degree of intellectual freedom denied to others. Within the closed world of the Masons' Lodge, ideas could be discussed that would be condemned as heretical in the public square. They read not only the Bible, but also translations of Euclid, Plato, and perhaps even more esoteric texts that trickled into Europe from the Arab world. They understood that the universe, God's creation, was structured according to divine geometric and mathematical principles. Their task was not simply to build a house of worship, but to erect a model of the cosmos itself, a microcosm of heaven on earth. So, when we look again at our Mason and his Green Man, several interpretations emerge. One school of thought, championed by scholars like Kathleen Basford, sees these figures as remnants of a persistent folk tradition that the church could not fully stamp out. In this view, the Green Man was a popular motif, gradually stripped of its pagan divinity and absorbed into Christian iconography as a symbol of resurrection or the fertility of God's creation. He becomes a tamed demon, a nature spirit subservient to Christ. A second, more provocative interpretation suggests a conscious act of syncretism. This Mason, and others like him, may have seen no contradiction in honoring both the new faith and the old ways. They may have believed that divinity was a vast, multifaceted reality, and that the spirit of the green earth and the transcendent sky god were simply different faces of the same ultimate mystery. This was a private, personal theology, a quiet rebellion against the rigid dogmas imposed from the pulpit. It was a way of ensuring the old gods were not forgotten, giving them a home within the walls of the new one. This quiet act of defiance, this single carving hidden in the shadows, thus becomes a key. It unlocks a hidden history, a story of philosophical countercurrents and suppressed beliefs flowing silently beneath the great monolithic tide of medieval Christendom. It forces us to ask what other secrets are encoded in these stones, and what compelled these devout builders to embed symbols of an older and perhaps forbidden cosmos within the very heart of their sacred world. Building on that solitary mason's secret carving, we move from the visceral act of stone cutting to the silent, cerebral world of the architect's lodge. Imagine a different scene, a sealed room, its walls bare save for a tracing board. On a vast oak table, a parchment is unrolled. It is covered not with scripture, but with a dizzying web of circles, triangles, and squares, a design for the west facade of a new cathedral. A group of master masons, their faces serious in the candlelight, lean over the plan. They speak in a coded language of ratios, of the golden mean, of the ad quadratum and ad triangulum methods of construction. They are not just planning a building, they are mapping the universe. This is where the green man's intuitive folk power meets a highly intellectual philosophical tradition. The cathedral builders, the custodians of these powerful guilds, were the inheritors of an ancient stream of esoteric knowledge. This knowledge, a blend of science, art, and mysticism, formed the invisible scaffolding upon which the visible stones were laid. This intellectual lineage drew from several powerful currents that flowed beneath the surface of official medieval theology. The first was Pythagoreanism, the ancient Greek philosophy that proclaimed all is number. For the Pythagoreans, numbers and geometric ratios were not just tools for calculation, they were the actual organizing principles of reality, the divine thoughts of the Creator. This belief found its perfect expression in music, where simple integer ratios created the consonant harmonies of the octave, the fifth, and the fourth. The Masons translated this idea into what Goethe would later call frozen music. The proportions of a cathedral, the ratio of the nave's height to its width, the spacing of the columns, the curvature of the arches, were designed to replicate these divine harmonies, creating a space that would resonate with the soul in the same way as a sacred chant. They were building a symphony in stone. The second current was Neoplatonism, a philosophy that entered medieval Christian thought primarily through the works of a 6th century Syrian monk known as Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. His writings, which profoundly influenced Abbot Schuger, the visionary behind the first Gothic cathedral at St. Denis, described a universe cascading downwards from a single, ineffable divine source, the One. For Schuger, light was the most direct physical manifestation of this divine essence. Gothic architecture, with its soaring vaults, slender columns, and vast expanses of stained glass, was therefore a practical theology. It was designed to dissolve the solid walls, to flood the interior with colored mystical light, and to lift the soul of the worshipper upwards, back towards its divine source. The building itself became a spiritual instrument, a tool for achieving ecstatic union with God. When you combine these philosophical ideas, the universe as number and the building as a conduit for divine light, you get a blueprint for a cathedral that is far more than a place of worship. It is a functional model of the cosmos. Researchers in the 20th century, like Keith Critchlow and John Mitchell, began to rigorously decode these structures. In his seminal work on Chartres, Critchlow demonstrated how the entire cathedral's layout could be generated from a few simple geometric figures, primarily the square and its diagonal, reflecting a profound understanding of sacred geometry. He and others have proposed that these cathedrals were also giant astronomical observatories, with specific windows or pillars designed to align with the sun on solstices and equinoxes, marking sacred time. This act of weaving the cycles of the sun and moon into the architecture was a direct echo of ancient pagan monuments like Stonehenge and Newgrange. It was a baptism of cosmic time, sanctifying the solar year within a Christian framework. Perhaps the most enigmatic and famous example of this encoded knowledge is the cathedral labyrinth, most notably the one at Chartres. The official church interpretation presented it as a symbolic pilgrimage, the path to Jerusalem, which penitents could follow on their knees as a substitute for the arduous journey to the Holy Land. But its design, an intricate, unicursal path that winds its way to a center, has far older pre-Christian origins, harking back to the Cretan labyrinth of the Minotaur. In esoteric traditions, the labyrinth is not a maze to get lost in, but a path of initiation. It represents the soul's journey through the material world, a descent into the self to confront the monster within, followed by a triumphant return to the light of spiritual awakening. For the initiated Mason, this pattern on the floor was a complete cosmology, a map of spiritual transformation. These are not random decorations or simple allegories. They are complex philosophical statements, a second Bible written in the universal language of number, symbol, and light. The question then is monumental. How did this sophisticated, potentially heretical knowledge system, with its deep roots in pagan thought, not only survive, but flourish at the very center of Christian power? Was the church hierarchy unaware, or were some of its highest members initiates themselves, silently sanctioning the creation of these multi-layered temples of wisdom? From the geometric secrets embedded in medieval stone, we land squarely in the present day, in that same cathedral nave. A tour guide stands before a group, explaining the exoteric or public meaning of a rose window, describing the scenes from the life of the Virgin Mary depicted in the glass. It is a beautiful and orthodox explanation. But a few feet away, a visitor stands alone, holding a book not on Christian iconography, but on sacred geometry and alchemy. They see something entirely different, a mandala, a representation of cosmic wholeness. They count the 12 petals as the signs of the zodiac, the central circle as the alchemical sun, the source of spiritual gold. In this single moment, the central tension of the architect's heresy is laid bare. The same object holding two radically different meanings, one for the uninitiated public and another for the esoteric seeker. The question of how these dual meanings manage to coexist continues to fuel not only intense academic debates, but also vibrant contemporary spiritual movements. On one side of the academic spectrum, historians like Richard Kiekuffer, in his work Magic in the Middle Ages, urge caution. He argues that we must be careful not to project our modern love for conspiracy and hidden knowledge onto the past. For the average medieval person, the world was already enchanted. The line between religion and magic, between a saint's relic and a protective talisman, was incredibly porous. From this perspective, the Green Man might not represent a conscious act of pagan rebellion by an intellectual elite, but rather the persistence of popular folk belief that the church pragmatically tolerated and absorbed. The church had a long history of this kind of syncretism, of co-opting pagan sacred sites for its churches and repurposing pagan festivals, turning the winter solstice celebration of Yule into Christmas and the spring fertility festival of Eostra into Easter. The Green Man, in this view, is simply another example of this process, a powerful local symbol that was easier to baptize than to eradicate. This interpretation grounds the phenomenon not in a secret society of heretical philosophers, but in the messy, vibrant, and syncretic reality of everyday medieval faith. On the other side are those who see a more deliberate and profound preservation of ancient wisdom. This view has been embraced with passion by modern spiritual seekers. In the 20th and 21st centuries, there has been a significant movement among neo-pagans, New Age practitioners, and students of Western esotericism to revisit these cathedrals, not as Christian monuments, but as universal sacred spaces. For them, the builders were enlightened masters who encoded timeless, universal truths into stone to protect them through an age of dogmatic intolerance. These modern pilgrims walk the labyrinths not as a symbolic journey to Jerusalem, but as a meditative tool for self-discovery. They study the geometric proportions to find healing harmonies. They see the pagan symbols not as quaint folk art, but as powerful gateways to ancient wisdom, a direct link to a pre-Christian earth-based spirituality. This re-engagement is, in itself, a fascinating religious phenomenon. It's an act of rereading history, of reclaiming a narrative, and it highlights a profound truth. The meaning of a sacred symbol is never fixed. It is a living thing, constantly being reinterpreted by new generations in light of their own spiritual needs. The architect's heresy then transcends being a mere historical puzzle. It becomes a powerful case study in the complex, fluid, and often contradictory nature of human belief. It forces us to confront the porous boundaries between faiths, to see how ideas flow, merge, and hide within one another across centuries. It reveals the enduring power of symbolism to carry multiple layers of meaning, speaking to different people in different ways. And it reflects a constant human yearning to find our place in the cosmos, to map the sacred, and to build bridges between the seen and the unseen world, whether through orthodox prayer or a secret language of geometry and stone. What this deep historical intermingling ultimately tells us is that faith is not a monolith. It is a tapestry woven from countless threads of official doctrine, folk belief, philosophical speculation, and personal revelation. The silent stones of the great cathedrals do not tell one story. They tell 1,000, all at once. They stand as a testament to the fact that even in the most dogmatic of ages, the human spirit will always find a way to whisper its own more complex truths.